Roberto De Zerbi has been one of the most exciting coaches across Europe, maybe even the world, in the last 18 months since he joined Brighton. He has had everybody purring about his tactical football and how exciting the football is that Brighton have been playing, from Roy Keane to probably even your mum has been talking about him. His style has been so effective that even one of his former coaches has taken inspiration from the philosophies that he uses, becoming, as I've coined, the first De Zerbian disciple. Other managers have had their own disciples, or coaches that have come out from being under them as players or as coaches in their teams. The likes of Pep Guardiola under Johan Cruyff, you've got Pochettino under Bielsa, and Mourinho, who learned from Bobby Robson. And now one of De Zerbi's former assistants is making his mark in Ligue, and his name is Francesco Farioli. So Francesco Farioli is a 34-year-old Italian coach who was born in Barga in central Italy, in Tuscany. Fun fact about Barga though, it is the most Scottish town in Italy, as lots of Italians in the 1900s went to Scotland and came back. So it means about 40% of people in that town have Scottish relatives, which is fun. But anyway, back to Francesco. So he started as an academy goalkeeping coach, moved about Serie D and Serie C, and then became a goalkeeping coach in Qatar with Aspire Academy. He then wrote an analytical piece about De Zerbi's Foggia at the time. De Zerbi read it, was very intrigued by him, and invited him to join his coaching staff when he moved to Benevento, which he did in 2017-18. He then moved with De Zerbi to Sassuolo, and then became an assistant manager in Turkey with Alanyaspor, moved to Fatih Karagümrük as a head coach, and then moved back to Alanyaspor as manager in 2021-2022. He resigned in the January of that year, and then this summer, June 2023, became Nice manager. And I think before moving on to his philosophies, I think this quote from the Nice sporting director, Florent Gassolfi, quite nicely kind of sums up how he sees Farioli and how his style of play kind of works with Nice. So he says, there are lots of teams that want possession and to control the game, but he also searches for stability. And he says, it's intellectually stimulating to discover a different way of playing and a very defined style of play. Now that's quite the backing from Farioli's superior just 3 months into his role. But we're going to look at how he's been so successful and why it's been so tactually stimulating and interesting for that sporting director, and why he's looking like a very promising manager for the future. So Nice are currently second in Ligue, just 1 point behind Monaco, who they already beat 1-0 away this season, and 1 point ahead of PSG, who they also beat away this season 3-2. They currently scored 9 goals so far this season from 11.7 XG. 3 of those obviously came against PSG. That shows that they're definitely still underperforming those 9 goals versus the 11.7 XG, and there's definitely still room for them to improve. However, they do have the lowest expected goals against in the league, 6.0. Now that really highlights a team who are very defensively solid, and we'll show reasons behind that in their pressing and their defensive structure in a minute. Overall, Farioli's kind of systems focuses on generally shorter passing and kind of maintaining possession, quite similar to how De Zerbi does. Now, it's very similar to Brighton. They use their centre-backs a lot in possession, and we'll show that in a minute, how he uses Dante, who's somehow 40 and still playing, and Todibo in a very similar way to the use of Dunk and the Webster or Van Hecke, whoever. But a quick look at the overview of the general team and the kind of business they did in the summer. So looking here at the most recent team that they put up against Metz, generally the team plays in a 4-3-3, the key players being largely Dante, Todibo, Thuram and Moffi. Many people think that Thuram will probably move on in the summer, but he's a very, very interesting player, very exciting player. Nice did get rid of a lot of dead wood in the summer. They got rid of Ross Barkley, Aaron Ramsey, Kasper Schmeichel, Morgan Schneiderlin, all released. They sold Kasper Dolberg, Calvin Stengs and Andy Delors for 5 to 6 million euros each. And to replace them, they kind of focused on the ability to carry the ball. And 3 players really highlight this. So they brought in Jeremy Boga from Atalanta, fantastic 1v1 player, very, very good at taking players on and progressive carries. He's in the 99th percentile for take-ons across Europe's top 5 leagues and the 98th for progressive passes. You also have Terem Moffi up front, an adept carrier and very intelligent physical presence up front, and one of 3 of the Nigerian golden age for strikers. You know, him, Victor Boniface and Victor Osimhen. And the third that Nice brought in this summer was on loan, Morgan Sanson from Villa, who's another great carrier in the 91st percentile for centre mids for progressive carries. Also a great creator and passer, and really fills that kind of third role for Nice in the midfield. And it kind of follows along a trend that we saw from Man City, from Spurs, of having more ball carriers in your team, and it really fits the ethos of Farioli's team to have these ball carriers in midfield, as we'll see in a minute. But to generally reduce the squad size, and they lowered the squad average age by moving on those players and created quite a nice aged experienced team to really challenge in Ligue 1 this season. So when we look at similarities between De Zerbi and Farioli, there are a few tactical parts that are quite similar between the Brighton and Nice teams that we can see. So the first off is patience in build-up with centre-backs. Now Dante and Todibo, who I've already said is Dante's 40, which is just insane, are the 3rd and 7th highest in terms of passes attempted in Ligue 1. behind 4 PSG players who have possession all the time and 1 Rennes centre-back. And it really shows how Nice, and in this particular philosophy that Farioli uses, trying to control the ball with their centre-backs, with the studs on the ball sometimes happening, which is similar to what Brighton used to entice the press forward, play the ball around the back and look for holes in the opposition's press. To kind of affirm this, Todibo, against Metz in their 1-0 victory over them, recorded 164 accurate passes. That is the most of any Ligue 1 player at all this season. And when you compare that to Brighton, Lewis Dunk, Brighton's centre-back, has the most accurate passes this season of anyone in the Premier League, which kind of highlights the use across both of these tactical systems and the similarities of utilising the centre-back to kind of build up a lot more than maybe other teams do. Obviously, like Brighton, like many high-quality teams do, Nice follow like a high-pressing style, very flexible, but Nice do use a couple of different structures to combat the ball playing in over the top, which does happen quite a lot in Ligue 1 for them. And we'll look at how they deal with that in quite a specific way in a minute. They also utilise width with their fullbacks, who often invert to allow options in the midfield and to create space for the wingers to have 1v1 situations, which is similar to what happens with Brighton. They are also more than happy to go long from the centre-backs in possession, to go in behind the opposition, particularly on counters, as we saw in the PSG game, when Todibo would play lots of long balls into Terem Moffi and they would counter-attack off that, which is a very similar kind of counter-attacking system that Brighton might use. And they also very much entice the opposition to press higher through passing into midfield and back out to enable kind of space to open up across the pitch, which again is very similar to Brighton. So you can see the kind of connections between De Zerbi's kind of ideas and Farioli, but there are a few differences which we'll go through in a second. So to kind of highlight this enticing of oppositions playing balls into and back out of midfield, we've got the one and only goal that Nice scored against Metz in their 1-0 win, obviously. So here Todibo has the ball. You can see that in Ndiashime, who has one of the hardest names to pronounce I've ever seen, is kind of here. He's the centre midfield, the kind of pivot. And then you have the 3 in midfield here. Here is Terem Moffi. So Todibo has the ball here, looking for options. He's got quite a few options on the ball, but then plays the ball into Moffi, into this area here. As you can see, he comes in, he brings the centre-back with him and creates different passing lanes to open up for him. Kind of move the press about from Metz, kind of create more spaces in behind. You can see that he's created this big space here between these 2 centre-backs that could be exploited, but in this particular passage of play it isn't. This is about 15 seconds later of Nice kind of holding the ball, moving it kind of side to side, trying to find different ways to progress the ball into that midfield. And you can see here that Moffi is again moving into these sort of areas to kind of utilise this space behind the first line of press that the Mets have. Now Terem Moffi occupying this sort of area attracts players to kind of cover those passing lanes. So this guy here is moving into this sort of area to open up the ball into Ndiashime. If I can get that name right once this video, I'll be overjoyed. So the ball does get played into him. You can see Terem Moffi's running off the back of the defender here to create this space for Ndiashime to run into. And he does. He carries the ball into this area. Thuram here, you can see one of the 2 8s that Nice use getting into the box, making those progressive runs to create space to drag this defender away from Boga to create this 1v1 that they like to create for Boga because he's so good in take-ons in these really ideal situations. Now Boga gets this ball and he runs. He takes the ball inside, creating a lot of space here for Bard. Because he's such a good dribbler and so good at these take-ons, he attracts 2 Mets players here, that overload on this left-hand side for Bard is going to be very crucial in creating this goal. So he proceeds to drive in and plays the ball into Thuram, into this area here. Thuram receives the ball and very smartly doesn't just turn and whack it like many other players might do. Whether this is tactical instruction or just Thuram being a good player, plays this ball out to Bard, who's in loads of space in this area, as we pointed out here, because the defender that's supposed to be on him is more concerned with the immediate threat to goal that Thuram possesses in this area. And then Thuram plays the ball out to Bard, and Bard's in a fantastic place to get the ball across the face of goal. He does it very nicely and gets it to the back post where Bouadaoui is to tap the ball into the back post. But as with any inspiration, managerial-wise or in most things in life, there are going to be some differences, and there are a few ones that you can see when you watch Nice. One of them was when Nice were playing against PSG. So they changed to be generally more reactive to a team like PSG, who are more dominant in possession, played on the counter and used Terem Moffi to occupy the PSG defence and sort of create off him like you would in any sort of counter-attacking situation. And he was involved in all 3 goals, which obviously paid off really, really well for Nice in this game. So they did set up a little bit differently against PSG. You had Ndiashime, instead of being in that CDM role, he moved into the middle of a back 5 essentially. And this was to really help Todibo and Latomba with Mbappe generally. He was also given license to move in to kind of press the central attacking midfielders. In this case was Vitinha. And Ndiashime would often kind of follow him into these areas because Mbappe would sit out wide, as would Dembele on the other side. So he would be given that license to kind of press in, stop them from turning and moving and progressing the ball in that area, which I thought was very interesting and really did work tactically. And Lotomba would often press all the way up onto Hakimi and leaving Todibo with Mbappe, so they would go 1v1 sometimes, but it really highlights kind of the flexibility in their pressing structure and enables the players to gives them the opportunity to react to the situations that they see, and increases the chances that they're going to win those individual battles when they have the kind of ability to think on their feet and to move into different spaces to kind of combat that danger. So another slight difference between Farioli and De Zerbi is their pressing structure, and I'll leave a link in the description to John Mackenzie's thread, which was really helpful in kind of describing and understanding this. But when they're pressing in a 4-4-2, they do it quite differently to how other teams and even Brighton do it. So typically you'd have one of your two 8s here moving up into here to help Teremoffi, and your pivot would go here and you'd press in a 4-4-2 like this. But Nice do it a little bit differently. And that is because Laborde here, the right winger, comes forward to help Moffi in this situation. Lotomba moves forward here to press the right winger. Todibo moves over and Ndiashime moves into centre-back. Now, this does create a couple of little things. It leaves 2v1 in this situation, and that is something very important that Farioli has done, which means that these long balls from, say, the defender or the goalkeeper can't be played over the top into a 1v1 situation. And he kind of allows that overload in midfield, because if teams can play through them, then they're very much more capable to defend against it in this kind of 4 versus 3 that you have with Ndiashime moving into the centre-back rather than being pulled about by the wing-backs and other sort of different players in these situations. And they say that if you can play through us, then we've got more chance of defending against it. But that means that the long ball completely over the press is also less of an option for these teams that maybe don't have the quality in possession that Nice do have as well. So what might the future hold for Nice and Farioli? Well, obviously they're second in the league, so they've been successful so far. They've had some luck in their victory over Monaco, where Bolka saved 2 penalties from Balogun, and they had a late winner from Boga in the 93rd minute. So obviously there's a little bit of luck there, and they do need to score a few more goals. Obviously they're underperforming on their XG, and they might need to create more to win games by a bit of a greater margin. But they're currently 4 wins, 4 draws, no losses. So to be unbeaten at this point in the season, having played Monaco and PSG, it's quite impressive. They do have Marseille next up on the 21st of October. And if they can remain unbeaten through that, then there's a good chance that this form can continue. They do, however, have quite a small squad. So injuries to someone like Moffi or to Todibo could really impact their season, because there's not really anyone that has the quality to kind of replace them. As I said, they do need to create more, but if they can continue having this best defence in the league with the quite interesting pressing structures that they're using, then maybe 1 goal wins might be quite common for them throughout the rest of the season. And for Farioli, what does the future look like? Well, it's looking quite promising. He's already been linked with quite a few jobs before the Nice one, but he's a very tactically interesting manager and quite malleable, as we've seen, to different situations, very willing to adapt his ideas, and has a chance to kind of continue this performance with like a squad who's almost kind of tailor-made with him, with good ball carriers, quite young, some experience there. Dante really drags up that average age, being 40, but he's getting the best out of him. And he's already displayed, he has a willingness to really adapt to his opponent, particularly in that game against PSG, which is always going to be really good for any sort of manager if those adaptations work. Now, if this quite mental trajectory for him can continue, then who knows where Farioli might end up in the future. But for the moment, this Nice team is really fun to watch. Enjoy it while it lasts, enjoy it while he's there, but the future looks really bright for him, and maybe he might have some disciples himself in the future. Farioli's definitely a very exciting manager. Nice are definitely really worth watching, and if you can see that Marseille game on the 21st, I'd very much recommend watching it. But yeah, if you've enjoyed this, let me know. Like if you've enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to, I guess, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.